everyone. It's episode 305 of This is Whole Life. And if you survived the weekend that was church retreat, and then some of us went camping the next weekend with a 2.5-hour drive loaded with traffic on I-95. Oh, what a pleasure. And in a brand new tent that was gifted to us by Chad and Susan. We really love you, mean it, hashtag all the feels. But the tent was not water resistant. Boom. Major fail. So we will be selling that in a garage sale. Is it bearing false witness if you know it's not waterproof or water resistant and you sell it just as is?
We should probably talk about that, and maybe I could even use that as a sermon illustration when we get to that particular commandment.
Yeah, let me. I'll give you all the details.
Right.
It was pretty bad because it had only been raining slightly for about 10 minutes before everything inside the tent was wet. So that's pretty awesome. Anyway, but it was great. It was in the box, brand new. But who makes a tent that doesn't? Who makes a tent that doesn't repel rain?
People who live in a place where it doesn't rain.
Well, maybe California somewhere, desert,
Sahara.
Sahara. There you go. Anyway,
Florida during certain months of the year.
Well, I have heard that about Florida, but it certainly hasn't been true this winter.
No.
Lots of rain. So anyway, it's been 3 weeks of travel for my family, but I was still, even though we didn't make it to church this weekend, we were gone camping and we did have a good time. I don't want to make it sound like it was a waste, but we did miss church. And when I saw the sermon title, Boxing God, I was like, all right, I'm the greatest of all time. Are we putting on the gloves? What are we doing here?
You thought maybe we were talking about the Oscars or something?
Maybe the Oscars.
I told you I was going to find a way to work
I
this
know.
in.
We were talking about the Oscars. And my favorite meme that I had to post was just simply that if he hadn't slapped Chris Rock, Will Smith, if he hadn't slapped Chris Rock, I wouldn't have known the Oscars was on. And It's going to be a question for Trivial Pursuit in 50 years. Did Will Smith ever win an Oscar? And you're going to be able to say, yeah, he did, because didn't he slap that dude, right?
Yeah, I was going to say that probably will be more of the question of what actor slapped like a famous comedian in
live on the
2022. Yeah.
So before I get started, I just wanted to give a big shout out to Church Retreat. And I know Ken started his message that way, and I felt like it was only right of us to do it here because so many people, staff, work so hard. And Tammy is kind of the top tier of it all to make sure all the glue and the pieces stick together.
Tammy's the top tier. I'm the bottom tier.
And Ken's just on the bottom.
I'm at the bottom. No, well, when I'm at the bottom, I'm just at the bottom. Like I'm the bum. I'm like the guy that shows up with a lawn chair and gets to sit back and really enjoy it. It was so fun. And I do want to say, for those of you who I wish people could see behind the curtain, because sometimes you have a deeper appreciation for what happens when you see the way that things happen and come together and the people to do the hard work. But every single one of our staff members just really put their heart into it. And this is my first time doing a retreat, and it was certainly a retreat like no other.
Well, and
I mean that in the best way possible. It was like, I could do this more often.
I could do that. Well, I was a little surprised, to be honest, when in your message you're like, I'm not really a camp meeting kind of guy.
No.
And I would have had you pegged as a camp meeting guy, which only went into your sermon illustration of it wasn't in the box. And even if it had been in the box, would it really have given you a picture of Ken? Because I thought I was kind of catching Ken vibes of, like, I totally would have thought camp meeting. I'm a camp meeting guy.
Yeah, for those who may not know for those who may not be of the Seventh-day Adventist persuasion listening to this, camp meeting is a once a year get together within a certain region where people will come together for speakers and things like that. And in recent years, it seems to be kind of going to a certain age. Yeah, just a certain. Yeah. It just does. There's not. Fair. It doesn't always feel, and I would even say that people within that range, in that age range, probably would even say that there's times where they realize it doesn't feel overly relevant to the world.
Do we even do camp meeting in Florida anymore?
There is one. There is one. Yeah.
It used to be local here in Orlando at Forest Lake Church and at the Academy, and it was a big deal. And then it left, and it was like.
Yeah, my boss actually sent out an email asking pastors who wanted to volunteer to come help with that, and I was like, "Oh, this is volunteer. That's awesome. Thanks, Steve.
Awesome.
Appreciate that. Because he was like, and this would be a good time for new pastors to get to know people.
Yeah.
And I looked at my calendar and I was like, man, it just doesn't line up.
I am so busy.
That is a pity.
Well, and speaking of speakers, we had a great speaker, Peter Enns, and I'm the worst. I don't know anybody. So when people are like, oh, have you read this book? Have you read this book? You know, have you heard this person? Yeah. I don't know anybody.
Well, don't even feel bad about that.
Did you not know him either?
Hey, Peter, if you're listening to this, no offense, but I had not heard of Peter before Tammy said, hey, that's who I booked to come. And I was like, oh, cool. Let me go get the book.
Yeah. Well, and we had other families, not of our church community, our Orlando church community, but another church. Multiple people drove up for the weekend so that they could listen.
We had people, it wasn't just either other Seventh-day Adventist churches. We had people from other denominations that actually came out.
Really?
Yeah, we did.
I didn't know that.
We had somebody who came from Alabama, I think. We had somebody who came up from, I feel like maybe it was Petersburg or somewhere like that.
Nice. Well, the people that around the campfire on Friday night that I was talking to, I went to Academy with her. So I don't think I've seen her. I mean, we see her every so often around, but that was I'm like, what are you doing here? I don't think you don't go to church here. And she's like, no, we're here to see Peter. So I was like, oh, all right. Well, then he's probably, maybe he is good. And turns out he was very good. And if you haven't caught last week's message, or last week's podcast, I'm sorry. I counted 78 people from the front that was in the A-frame at Colacqua that listened live and was able to participate. So you can hear some of your fellow WholeLife Church members asking questions from the front row during that. But we went like an hour and 20 minutes, and it was like, hey, I had to cut off John Monday, which I felt really bad about.
Wow.
Really. But Ken had, when you're the grand poobah of the whole show, you're in high demand. And Ken's like, yo, look, I got to get out of here. And then I'm like, yo, Peter, we could be here till another hour, and we would still be sitting
communion. Here. Don't make it seem like I was just trying to get out of there.
No, right? No, you had serious things to do.
I would have gone for another hour. It was
I would have too, but I kind of felt bad for Peter. I was like, he was tired.
I didn't feel bad for him.
No,
right, Peter? He paid you to be here.
Yeah, but I was like, let's be respectful of his time, and I thought it turned out really, really well. And
he's an awesome guy, by the way. Can I just say that? Just super down to earth. Really enjoyed spending some time with him.
Yeah, I mean, we had a little chance to talk before and after the podcast. And I think he was a little bit nervous beforehand. Like,
you think so?
He asked me, he's like, who are we talking to today? I mean, there'll be people here. He's like, will anyone show up? And I said, well, I don't think we've ever had more than maybe 20, 30 people. So, that's because there's a lot of activities going on. And not everyone's going to sit and listen to the podcast live when they can listen to it later. Mm-hmm. And then boom. People are trying to pull chairs in. Yeah. It's getting busy. And then we went through, and at the end, he came up to me afterwards and he said, very well done. He said, thank you for having me. He's like, I really enjoyed the podcast this afternoon. Yeah. So that was great.
Well, just let Peter know he's welcome to come back and make it the Randy, Ken, Jeff, and Peter show.
Yeah. Well, he has his own podcast called The Bible for Normal People, which
he may want to just, give that small stuff up and come to the big time with us.
We didn't compare numbers, so he did ask me how many, what kind of listens we got and who listened. But anyway, all that to say, don't miss Church Retreat, because really, you think it's only going to be Friday and then Saturday. Oh, I've got to go home. But there was activities on Sunday.
It was a good time.
Everyone had a great time.
Yeah.
And it was there was smiles all the way around. My family, this was undoubtedly our best retreat yet.
It was so fun. Even like you were saying that there's some people there that don't always attend our church or don't attend our church. And I heard from several of them, we're going to come by the church a little bit more. This is pretty good stuff. So.
Or people that you just don't see, because we have a lot of church members that live a long ways away too.
Honestly,
and to see them there, that was great.
Yeah, that's what I think I enjoyed the most about it, was just I really got to spend time with people and get to know people on a different level, which, at church you have X amount of time to spend, but, I think I was up till 12:30 or 1 almost every night just hanging out with people and chatting, and we just have the coolest people that come to WholeLife. We really do.
And they're willing to invite friends, which I think is a great idea. All right. This week we were this is the third commandment. No, second commandment.
Second
commandment.
Sermon, second commandment. Easy to get confused.
Easy to get confused. And I specifically wrote it down and then read it wrong. Maybe I'm becoming dyslexic. It's a possibility. And I was like, okay, well, now that I know we're not boxing, but we're actually putting God in a box, and this is what we're talking about. And I'm like, man, this is a lot similar to what the previous week was. So I was kind of curious as to where
Well, then you were really happy with how I started my sermon off then.
It was perfect.
You were like, yes, this will be short. I don't have that much prep for the podcast. This is really good.
This is just going to be a couple, maybe 2-3 questions, and we're going to get in, get out,
I mean, it's really the same thing, right? Have no other gods. Don't make idols. No idols. And really, I mean, what is how many idols does the average American really, carved idols that they're bowing down to and worshiping? I mean,
we carved one this weekend while we were camping. It was like a totem pole kind of thing around the campfire while it was raining.
I'm sure glad that I was able to have that sermon for you when you got back, so you could get rid of you, throw that back in the fire.
Well,
right?
it wasn't mine. I was just there to appreciate it. But then I was like, well, now I feel bad I didn't say anything. Like I should have been more in tune with what we were talking about.
Right.
I should have watched church live. That would have solved that. Yeah. But the immediate thing that came to my mind was when, you said we try to contain or box God up and then worship him in a smaller form than he actually is. And I've never heard it put quite that way, but it's completely true. But then I'm like, well, isn't this inevitable as a sinful human being who, like, simply by being born, we are sin, we are immersed in it. And like you mentioned, the Israelites, they didn't have any way to see his form. And we don't either. We don't know how to, there's no way for us to know him in a way that is significant to his overall, like the Almighty, like what we don't even know about him. And then I was thinking, like, what about like the Garden of Eden? Wasn't God in the box that Adam and Eve understood? It's probably a bigger box than we have, them being sinless and all at the time, but only a week. And if you think that's a literal week, I'm not going to go there, but I mean that they had a chance to hang out with God before, however long it was before they sinned. So,
well, let's be clear about this.
How can we?
And by the way, just for the record, I do believe that God created the world in a literal week, and that's my take on it.
I do too.
If Peter's listening, we respect what Peter believes and thinks. But I do believe in that literal week of creation. And what I don't believe is that they rescind the same week that they were created. I think that there was a lot more time.
In there.
For my own personal. But you know what? The nice thing about this is the Bible doesn't tell us that. The Bible doesn't make any statements about how long they were in the Garden of Eden before they were sinned. We just assume because chapter 3 comes after chapter 2 that it couldn't have been that long, right? To be. But I think there's some. If a day is as a year or 1,000 years is a day to God, then
what does it matter?
How long they could have been in the Garden of Eden for quite some time before that happened. So anyway, but I don't know where we were going with that. But
even being perfect, they could have. They had a box.
Sure.
That they understood of God. And so I think that it's always growing up when it was kind of the bootstrap mentality, it was you try to come out of that and people are like, ooh, be careful. You open up the box and then it was Pandora's box because then the possibilities are endless.
Yeah, but what's the point of a box, Randy?
Well, it's to keep everything organized. It's neat and fit. It's
I
know what's in it.
Our box is bad?
No, not necessarily.
It's how you use it, right?
It's what you put in it. It's what
you put in it. It's how you use it, though.
Okay.
What you say?
Well, usually using a box to haul things.
Mm-hmm.
I'm using it to store things.
Mm-hmm.
If it's clear, I'll put it on a shelf so I know what's in it and I can see it. It's organized. I might even put labels on it so I know what remind myself what's in it.
Yeah.
That's my wife talking right there.
I also find that boxes aren't bad, but the problem with a box is generally when we put something in a box, we're trying to contain it. We're also trying to only deal with it when we want to deal with it.
That's true. It's for storage.
Yeah, it's usually for storage.
You're hauling it, but it is for storage.
It's for storage. It's something that you're not planning. You're planning on using it when you want to use it and the way you want to use it.
Yeah.
And the problem with boxing human beings or God is that anytime a part of God or that human being slips out of the box, we try to slam or cram it back in to that. It isn't that neat. Life isn't that neat. People don't easily fit into one category, much less the God of the universe.
Yeah.
And a fantastic a book called Leadership and Self-Deception by the Arbinger Institute. So if you're looking for a book and you haven't read that one, I highly recommend it. You don't need to be, quote unquote, a leader. Everybody's a leader, by the way. You don't have to be a leader to read the book, but it's a fantastic book. And one of when I was being recommended the book by somebody, I was like, so, okay, yeah, but what's it about? And they said, it's about boxes. And I was like, oh, okay. And they're like, yeah, it's about trying to put people into boxes and not allowing them to ever get out of the box. So, we basically say this is a mean person, and we put them in the mean person box. But then that mean person does something really nice. and it doesn't fit into the mean box, but we still cram the person back in. We say that's an aberration. That they're a mean person. Why? Because they're in my mean box. They have to be that person. But people are much more complicated than that, right? There's some really horrible people who do some really, really wonderful things here and there. I mean, I don't know how to say any other way. There's some people who have been pretty rude to me in life who have come along later or even at the same time and done some really, really kind things for me too. And so it's really a difficult thing in life because we really like strong boxes. We like boxes that where people can't slip out on one side or the other, where this is who you are, stay in that box. And we use it to categorize and to keep it safe for ourselves and to also to be able to only deal with that. The mean people, I'm going to put that up on the high shelf away from everything else. I'm not going to go near it very often.
And if I'm having a bad day, forget it.
And the kind people box, I'm going to keep that one a little closer to myself and open that one up as I'm needing the kindness in my life. And so the thing about boxes is they protect us. They keep us from having to interact with things that we don't want to. We pick up the toys off the floor, put them into a box so we're not stepping on them and stubbing our toes, and that's not a bad thing. The problem is when we start trying to treat our relationships this way, and especially our relationship with God, when we start trying to say, God, this is who you are, not because that's who you said you were, but that's because that's who I need you to be. That's who I'm choosing for you to be. And we see this all the time, right? There's the people that fall into the nice God category. God is always nice. He never does anything that would be ever unpleasant. Anything that is unpleasant that's recorded in the Bible must have been an accident. Somebody transcribed it wrong.
Sure.
If I don't understand it, doesn't make sense to me, it doesn't seem like a nice thing for God to do, then there's something wrong with that, and that's not the way it is. And then there's the mean God people, right? There's the sinners in the hands of an angry God people, the people who are like, oh, God's really mean, he's really angry, he's super upset with you, you better get your life together before he smites you. That group of people, and when God starts doing nice things, that's kind of like, well, I guess, but beware, there's hell waiting for you, and it will be eternal, right? Because that's what mean God does. Mean God has eternal hell. Nice God, surely there's no hell or anything like that.
The rocks that fall on you are going to kill you right away.
Yeah,
so there's
something, So we try to box God up and put him into our own understanding. Then when somebody suggests that God could be something different than what we understand him to be, we get really angry about it. We get really upset because that can't be who God is. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't defend God's character when people say God is not love or whatever, but what I am saying is there's something wrong when we start getting really angry to the point of physical violence with people because we can't have a civil dialogue with them about something and just say, hey, well, you see it that way, I see it this way. I think a lot of times the reason sometimes we get so angry, there's two different reasons why people get angry. One is that it challenges their insecurity. They're not really sure what they believe about God. And when this suggestion comes along that God is something different than what they've always thought he is, it really rocks them to the core of who they are. And it really gives them just this sense of dis-ease and like they're not at ease anymore. They're being thrown off of their equilibrium, and so they become very angry and they act out when that sort of thing happens. The other reason that people can become very upset is when you really love somebody, you don't like to hear them being lied about. And so if you hear something being said about God and you love God deeply, and you hear somebody telling something about him that makes him not particularly lovable or that you feel like would turn people away from God that you love and that you want people to have a relationship, you become what the Bible calls jealous for God's honor.
Oh,
and so you want to go ahead and make sure that God is well represented and well thought of. And that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. When you love somebody, you want people to know the truth about them. However, the question becomes about how do you go about defending God's honor, if you will.
Do you become the angry God to defend the nice God?
Yeah, right. Exactly, right?
Is that how it has to work? Yeah.
And so that's the thing about boxes, but what we also know about boxes is that they contain. And that's a problem and that's where we really get into this discussion that we had on Sabbath about the second commandment, thou shalt have no other, you shall not make any idols that represent anything. The text I shared, God actually never shows his form until Jesus shows up. Until Jesus shows up, God doesn't really show his form. Jesus says, John, in the book of John, John says, no one has ever seen the Father, only the Son. And so nobody's ever seen God the Father.
What about Moses on Sinai? I mean, I know it was just a brief passing before him. It doesn't really say, but so you're probably not a form more so than.
Well, no, but it was a form. And I think there's that. And then there's also Abraham, who seems to encounter Jesus at some point. And so this is the way that, at least within the Seventh-day Adventist Church, that we answer that question, is that our understanding is we read it for John to be telling the truth when he says no one's seen God. Then that means that Jesus has always been the visible form of God that human beings have seen. We haven't seen the Father, we've only seen Jesus. And so it's Jesus actually that's handing out the Ten Commandments on Mount Sinai. It's Jesus that's showing up with Abraham.
Really?
Yeah.
I've never heard that one before. And I don't disagree necessarily. I don't have any ground.
Okay, I won't be mad at you.
No, I don't have any grounds to disagree.
If that's a box that's really bothering you, I will not be upset about it. But
no. And the thing that the really weird visual that I got when you talk about boxes and containing is like Build-A-Bear. You go in there and it's like, you can pick all these different things to make the coolest bear possible. And I'm like, ooh, there's the God that does the cool stuff like the miracles. Yeah. Ooh, I'm gonna put that one on. Yeah. And here's the God that sends his son to save. Ooh, let's put that one in there. I like that one too.
God that gives me wealth and prosperity.
Yeah,
that
prosperity gospel. Let's put
that one.
Maybe two of those.
And then over there in the dark corner is the God that calls me to suffering. Let's leave that one over there. That one that's somebody else's calling.
Well, can we just put that one in a box? I mean, I want all the accessories, but let's make sure that one doesn't we're not going to put it on right away.
That one goes to somebody else.
Yeah, and
somebody else's
garage sale. We won't tell them about that one.
But that's what we get into that second commandment, where the Bible tells us to not have idols, to not make idols in any image.
Yeah.
And the reason that I believe that this is different distinctly from the first one is because in the first one we're told we're not to have any other gods. Any other, yeah. In this one, I think that not only are we not, it continues on in that vein saying don't have any gods, don't make any other gods besides, but also don't make anything that represents me either. Why? Because I'm not able to be contained. I'm bigger than anything you can possibly imagine. And anytime you shrink me down into an idol size, into the form of something, you are basically trying to boil me down and make me into what you want me to be instead of what I am.
But with our understanding, is it even possible to not shrink him down to what we can understand? Or is that just because, that's done with, I love you, I'm trying to find out more about you, and it's a limited understanding? Or is it?
I think we will obviously always shrink God down into some, because we have to understand our natural God-given intellect causes us to want to make associations and to make correlations and to say, well, God is like this, God is like that. We naturally do that, and that's not a bad thing until we don't allow God to be everything that he can be, because we need him to be less than he is.
Even if we can't explain it.
And I mean, if you're an ant, you're going to explain human beings differently than you're going to explain human beings. If you're a dog or a cat, you're going to put it into a context that makes sense to you in the world that you're living in, with the visuals that you're able to see and what you're able to experience. And that's what we're always going to do with God. We're only going to be able to describe what we can see, what we can experience, and what we can feel. But that doesn't mean the problem with that is when we are never open to God being more than that.
What is that thing? What is that thing for us? I mean, the Israelites, it talks about, during the day they had the cloud, at night they had the pillar of fire. Moses saw the burning bush and heard it talk to him. The disciples had Jesus to live with. What is it today that, I'm not saying it has to be a physical manifestation, obviously, or even whatever the burning bush and whatever that cloud and the fire, however that God manifested himself in those physical things that could be seen. But I think so many times we're looking for, I'm looking, where do I find you where I go, ooh, take off your sandals, man, you're on holy ground. And maybe those aren't the kinds of things that we can have anymore. Not to say that God couldn't if he wanted to. They just don't seem to be prevalent. Or some of the things that come out where people say, I've seen what might be a miracle, and we're like, oh, come on, that kind of stuff doesn't happen anymore because it's so infrequent. But maybe it was infrequent then too, and we just have the text, so we go, well, yeah, look at all these times these things happen. But in actuality, it might not be any more than now. And I'm not sure about that.
So one of the joys of the podcast is I can actually get into some stuff that I wanted to get into in the sermon, but I didn't have time for it.
Absolutely.
One of the things that I dropped out of the sermon is the story of the bronze serpent. That, and by the way, I'm going to get to what you're really asking. You're asking about now, but I've got to go back to get to now.
Okay.
Moses is told by God, Jesus, to create this bronze serpent. The backstory of this is the children of Israel are out in the wilderness. They get tired of eating the food that they've been eating in the wilderness, which is manna, and it's just the same thing every day.
They want more of the birds.
Yeah, they wanted all these things happen. Well, anyway, the point is they're out there complaining again. And so God just kind of withdraws from them. He's like, okay, you don't want me to be around? Fine. And all these poisonous snakes come out and start biting the people. And the people are dying from these. I said poisonous, venomous, as my friends in the snake industry like to point out to me. Anyway, so these venomous snakes are coming out. They're biting the people. People are dying, and God tells Moses to create a bronze serpent, a serpent that replicates these same serpents that are biting them, and then tells them to put it up on a pole where anybody who looks at it will be healed immediately. That they all they have to do is look at this bronze serpent and they'll be healed. Which is kind of interesting because God just got done telling them, don't make any idols, right?
Yeah,
but God has them do this. It becomes a symbol of what Jesus is going to be, that Jesus is going to become sin on our behalf, and that anybody who turns their eyes upon Jesus, who becomes sin in our place, will receive life, will live. And so the miracle happens. These people are healed. The people that look at the bronze serpent are healed, and it's this amazing thing. And they actually hang on to this bronze serpent. And this is what often gets missed in Scripture, is that they actually do hang on to it. And then in the time of, I do believe, Gideon, if I'm remembering my Old Testament correctly, in the time of Gideon, we find that these people are now actually worshiping the serpent. So they're worshiping this bronze serpent, actually worshiping it. And it's become this false god, because they've kept this icon, this something that God actually gave them for good, and then they take it and they make it into what God didn't want them to make it into, which is a god, and they're worshiping that god instead of the real God that gave the power that healed people. And the name of this snake, I think, was Neheshtun. You can look it up in, I think, the book of Judges.
It's an N. I remember that.
Neheshtun or something like that, yeah. So anyway, where I'm running with that is it is very possible for God to give us a very, very good thing that we then turn into a very, very bad thing.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I kind of got into in the sermon. So when you're saying, what are some of the things that we can turn into idols? Well, there's all kinds of things that we can worship in place of God, that we can use to limit God, or that we can worship instead of God. We can put our attention on that instead of God, and we can be worshiping that thing. And we can be using that as what we look at. So there's that category. But in the sermon, what I really wanted to focus in on is what we as Christians often make into idols. We don't. Most Christians do not have the issue of little bronze idols that look like snakes, or that look like even human beings that they're bowing down to and praying to several times a day. Now, there are some Christians that do that, but that's not the majority of Christendom, I would not say. And it's certainly not the majority of our church members at WholeLife. And so what are the idols that we may be struggling with that you were talking about? What are some of the good things that God's given us? He said, hey, this is here for your healing. This is here for to make you well, that we could turn around and make into idols. And one of those things I suggested was maybe the Bible.
That was a little tough pill to swallow, but as soon as you say it, you go, oh, yeah. I can think of someone that, or I would even say someone, Ellen White, which until I started reading her for myself was like, no, I don't need any of that. Because all I had heard was how it was used. Maybe she was weaponized by many people, and they can quote that before the Bible. And I think that's something maybe as Adventists we have that might be a little bit more.
A little idolatry going on there, here and there.
That maybe some others don't
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what I thought of.
But this is whenever we go ahead and say, God, you must fit into this. And if you happen to stray out of that, and like you said, that's a big pill for some people to swallow. And somebody might be listening to me right now going, this is ridiculous. Don't you know your fundamental beliefs of the Seventh-day Adventist Church? Scripture, sola scriptura. I believe in all that. But that doesn't mean that I worship the Bible. And there are some people that worship the Bible over the giver of the Bible. And if you don't believe me, Jesus actually spoke to them in the book of John when he said, you search the Scriptures because in them you think you will find life. And yet you refuse to come to me who can give you life. And so that's the point that I really want people to make. You can search the Scriptures all day long thinking that if you spend enough time in the Bible, if you learn enough Bible verses, if you memorize enough, and you can miss the person that gave that book to us to point it to us. It's kind of like if Rochelle wrote me a whole bunch of love letters and I was so obsessed with the love letters that I would never go spend time with her because I was always in those love letters. Well, the love letters are there to point me towards my relationship. They're there to tell me about how Rochelle feels about me. But they don't encapsulate all of who Rochelle is.
Sure.
And so that's one of the things I think we need to think. I also talked about the idol of worship, where we put a certain way of worshiping. And this is, by the way, people probably in my particular what would we say, tribe of thinking would say, hey, a contemporary service is really important. It's really good to be able to be relevant to the culture around us. But it becomes a problem when I worship that more than the whole point of the worship service. It becomes a real problem, and it's easy to go ahead and pick on folks who say, no, it's got to be this old-fashioned kind of worship. But both, whenever we're not willing to come and worship the giver or the reason why we're having a worship service, and we become so obsessed with the details of it and fitting God into that can be an idol that we're worshiping. We're worshiping the music. We're worshiping the way the service is done over the giver, over God Himself, and so that's one. And a part of that can be the preacher. I just know a lot of people that are obsessed with a certain preacher, and that if this preacher says something, then that's the gospel truth. And they'll say, oh, no, but I always study my Bible. But it's always interesting to me how when you study your Bible, it always agrees with your favorite pastor. There's probably something wrong with that. I, for a fact, know that there are things that I preached about some years ago that I don't agree with anymore. I don't think I was right about that. It wasn't because I was trying to deceive anybody or be dishonest. It's just my understanding of God has changed in that amount of time. So for somebody to go back, however many years and get that sermon and go, well, that's what Ken has to always believe.
Yeah.
Well, my understanding is maybe it's changed around a little bit. And there's also, I think it would have been healthy at that time for somebody to go, I don't really agree with that when Ken says it. I don't know that that's always right. And it's okay. And we can always disagree in a nice way. You don't have to agree with the things I say in the sermon.
Sure.
I would love for you to think for yourself, and then we can kindly go, well, I see it different. Well, I see it this way. That's okay.
Yeah.
We'll see it the way that we see it, but let's be open to understanding who God is and that we can have growth. We should be having growth. Our understanding should be changing and growing. If not, you're either growing or you're dying.
Typically, I find that a lot of people that don't want to let you grow, they know you from this space, this time, this place in your life, or maybe you haven't always got along and, you're in the mean box or you're in this box or that box, whichever that might be, and there's no growth. And many times I think it is actual jealousy on the part of someone who hasn't grown the way they thought they were going to, and they feel a little bit left out. If you're like, well, I changed my mind. I mean, I'm not a politician. I'm not, then of course you're a flip-flopper, of course, because you changed your mind. And you don't have a good reason to do it because you can't explain why you flip-flopped other than that, we can only assume then that it's for nefarious reasons other than to say like, hey, I had this sermon before. Yeah, I totally believed it. And I can probably go back and tell you why I believed it at that time. But now I don't. I'm 20 years older. I've got a lot more life experience. And I think that's the part of the boxes as I was listening to the message was just that we're not we're actively participating in probably stunting somebody else's growth if we're not allowing them to grow in our eyes as well, because it's disconcerting sometimes when people like won't let you, like, no, that's not you. Or they know, or, someone will give an offhand comment, that doesn't sound like you at all. And it's like, well, from when? Like why? What about me would contradict this? And sometimes it can be fun. It can be little things. But I just thought, if we were just open to saying, hey, who knows why they changed their mind? Or, hey, they were nice to me and they were mean to me before. Let's take the nice, let's replace the old, and let's work from that premise moving forward. And then say, you know what? That was really nice. It was unexpected, but man, I appreciate it. Instead of saying, or, like, wow, I really thought you were going to smash me down there and you really surprised me by not being a jerk. Yeah. Thank you. I think there's really, really nice ways we can do it. That
you think God feels that way at all?
I think he feels that way because I think we feel in some ways like he would. We're created in his image, but I don't think he feels it the way we feel it. I think he feels all the range of emotions, but he doesn't hold the grudge, obviously, because he was willing to send Jesus to consistently be there to redeem us. So.
I think that one of the sad things about it is that we're going to take God, and can you imagine if you can I imagine as a 47-year-old man wanting to relate to my mother in the same way that I did when I was 2 years old?
Scary.
Yeah. Does that mean my mother has like drastically changed from who she is? No, not necessarily.
Yeah.
But a 2-year-old is relating to their mother completely different, we hope, than a 47-year-old man.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean my mom has different values, is a different person. It just means that I've grown up and I've gotten more mature, and the relationship between my mother and I hopefully has changed significantly. And yet we want to do that to God. We want to say the same God that the God that was having to deal with people in a prehistoric situation and that was working with the Jewish people, the Israelites out in the wilderness, that before there was the internet, which I know that's a foreign concept to some people, but before that there was all the things in a different culture in a different time, that God has to do exactly the same way of handling us today in our context, in our culture, in our time. That's foolishness.
Yeah.
It's foolishness. It doesn't mean that God has changed at all. The principles stay the same, but what we would hope would change is that as humanity has gained technological advances, that cultures have changed and times have changed and the ways of thinking about things have changed, that God staying the same still relates to those in different ways because they're at different places. And all you have to do is read through the Bible to see this happening. You see this happen, that there is a difference in the way that God treats the Israelites in the wilderness and the way that he treats the disciples in the New Testament church. There's just a difference. And it's not because God has changed. It's not because he's more loving now. He's fine. It's not God grew up and was like, oh, I guess I'll be nice. I guess I guess I should change. That whole smiting thing wasn't really working out. God didn't change. God stayed the same. God is the same, but his methods and the way that he relates is very different depending on the age and the culture and the time that he's working with. And it doesn't mean that he has changed or that there's something wrong with that. It just means that we need to go ahead and be okay with a God that isn't one-dimensional.
Well, and I think that a lot of times that question still comes up because you said God speaks to each time and age in their language and in their way. God is eternal and he does not change, but the methods he uses to reach his people vary according to the needs of the people he's reaching. And
by the way, can I just reference the book that thought came from? The Blue Parakeet.
The Blue Parakeet. All right. Both of the books that we've referenced today will be in the show notes in case you are interested and would like to look at either of those closer or maybe purchase them for yourself. And when I thought of that, I thought of, let's drill this all the way down to us, like who this is for whole life. And I think that Andy was here for a long time, and Andy was shepherding, and he was giving messages from his perspective and where God was leading him and what stage of life he was in. And now when you came, we got a totally different view on the same subjects. We're talking about a lot of the same things. And while the core principles that you're getting from God that we're preaching from his word that aren't any different, it's just the next generation is looking at it a little bit differently. And the thought processes and the ability to look at a situation and find what maybe someone else hasn't thought of before, or just look at it through a different lens that just triggers, oh yeah, I can tell. So when I've often been befuddled at that, when I'm just like, look, everyone else had all this stuff, and what do we get? We don't have anything. We get nothing. And yet I think we have people that are in their Bibles for the right reasons in the right way, not worshiping it, but just trying to find out more about God and letting those pieces that they find allow them to love him more and him to love them more. And then all of a sudden you start to get a message where we're going to go 11 on the 10 Commandments. We're going to go deeper, and we're going to try to figure out maybe like, hey, we struggle with the what was the Exodus 24-6, where it's like, we're not really crazy about the whole 4 generations and the whole family, but then we really like the 1,000 years of the plus on that side. We like that. Yeah. But then when you look at it from that way, we'll just call it the Ken Wetmore effect here at WholeLife. It's just a different way of looking at things. It's your life experiences that cause you to see the Bible the way you do, whether you 100% agree or disagree. But to me, that was comforting only because, to me, it's an answer that satisfies that God is still working in people to help us together understand. And that's the gift of that, which doesn't always make sense because I don't get to see the cloud. I don't get to see the fire. I don't see the Red Sea opening and closing in front of me. I don't see the leper healed. I don't see all these things. But I do see that we see things so much differently than they possibly could have. And then the way things are explained when we don't like the 4th generations and things all start making sense. Yeah. And you go, wow, he really isn't. That's the proof that he really isn't that God, because he's still working in all of us to make that happen. So I think that's we don't have a top 10 list of signs you're worshiping an idol by any chance, do we?
No.
Okay. Well,
did you want one?
Well, it was the church retreat in me. I'm still on a little bit of a Saturday Night Live.
The top 10 ways you're worshiping an idol.
Because you threw the pen. So I'm just like, weekend update, and Letterman with the top 10 was all throw it at the camera. So it just made me think of maybe we need a top 10 list.
You're worshiping. I think what I said in church was though that you're worshiping an idol when you become very, very, very upset when it gets taken away. Yeah, absolutely. When it becomes more important to you than about anything else. I think most people are pretty smart, and I think most people probably have some notion
of what those are,
of when they are over the top with something. No, that's not always true. There are some people who really think that they're genuinely worshiping God.
Blind spots
and they're not.
Is one of my favorite Kennisons.
But I've also noticed. I've noticed that those that blind spots are often not found very well.
No.
And even when you point them out, it doesn't usually.
The truth in advertising really makes that one stick.
So I've noticed that God works best when God points people's blind spots out to them rather than Ken Wetmore. So you pray about it. Ask God to show your idols, and He'll start to open it up. And like I said in the sermon, it'll hurt.
Be careful.
It'll hurt.
That's it.
But you should ask for it.
No, absolutely.
It's the thing you need. And some people say, "Be careful what you ask God for." I don't agree with that. I think we don't ask for enough. But what I would say is, don't be surprised when it's painful.
And it might even be for a good thing, but sometimes I'll never forget the look on your face when you were describing the person that put your name in the hat to come to WholeLife Church, and in the message, it was just like almost a little bit of that anxiety that was there when you first heard the guy, oh yeah, sure, yeah, I threw your, I hope that's okay, and the feeling that you can relate to because everyone's had it on some level before, and the look on your face was it just caused us all to unfortunately bust out in laughter at your expense. But it's really true when you feel those things. It's like, well, it turned out to be a really good thing. But in the moment, you're just dreading it. Like, no, not now. No, you got to be crazy. We just finished. And I get it. All right. I think that these are all going to be hard in some way because, there's a reason he gave us the 10 because he knew that these were all going to be issues we would have to deal with.
Yeah.
And so they're all hard in a way, but at the same time, I really felt like defining the box like you did was really, really important. I hope those listening, I hope you did too. And if there are any questions that you have about this, I think these are fundamental things that we need to have settled in ourselves, and maybe that we don't have all the answers, but we have an idea of, all right, God, you need to show me what this is in my life. And as we work through these 10, so you can always do that and send it to us here, 407-965-1607 or podcast at WholeLife.church. And we would love to take your voicemail, text, and you can remain anonymous in those, except for the email. Unless, you don't put your name in your email. Just make a Gmail like you don't know my name at gmail.com. Send it to me and I won't know who you are. All right. We had questions from Q&A. Stanley was not the host. So he, being the gracious guy that he is, going, man, I can't leave Sierra up there and wonder if we're going to have any questions, right? So he had to send one in. And he said, can I cherish both what's in the God box, in air quotes, and get to know God?
You can cherish what's in the God box as you're willing to take the lid off the box and let it out.
Okay. Wow. Can I cherish both what's in the God box and get to know God? But you have to take the top off.
You have to be willing to allow you have to allow God to get out of the box. It's, Tammy told me, I think it's a general way of saying you could have made this sermon a lot shorter. But Tammy told me afterwards, she said, when they were filling the box up, I said, why didn't you put me in the box? And I think both of the people that came up volunteered said, well, because you wouldn't fit in there. She said you could have just dropped the mic and walked away right after that.
Oh, no, that's true.
But she's not wrong.
No.
But that was the point.
I think everyone got that point because it was very obvious. But when you said it was, of course, it's funny because, of course, you're not going to fit. But
that's the problem is that we can cherish what's in the box, but when we're trying to contain God, we've got a problem because God doesn't fit in a box.
I pictured that beautiful pink Sterilite plastic bin and Ken's size in relation to no way he's going to fit in that. And I thought, and my immediate picture was like the Milky Way galaxy and what we know of our universe, which is probably very minuscule. And then, how big, just in relation, if you think about that and how big God is, and then go, we probably haven't scratched the surface there either. No. And that's a pretty cool idea to play around with and let kind of ruminate in your head, especially as you're reading your Bible and you see some of these things that seem so insignificant. But when you think of that's the guy or that's the person or that's the entity that was putting all this into place, kind of puts a little different spin on it as well. We also had a question from Corbin. I'm not sure. Maybe you'll know what it means. I don't. Does the omnis cram God into a idol box? I don't know what the omnis are. Do you?
If omnis being used the way that I understand it to be used, which is that God is in everything and through everything.
Okay.
That's the way I understand it.
Sure.
Then it's an intriguing question because are we cramming God into a box by saying he is everything? And I think the danger is that while God created everything, God is also very specific about us not worshiping everything.
Absolutely.
And so, can omnis create those who believe in a God that's in everything and through everything? Can they be worshiping an idol? They can in that sense, and that whenever you kind of cram that box and that lid and try to create a form around it, you can be creating an idol there.
Yeah. And that is a unique question though, because if we believe that all of creation is his, then it does create an interesting question. Good one. Thank you, Corbin, for sending that in.
Yeah, very thoughtful question.
All right, one of this week's Whole Life Reflections asked, is your understanding of who God is different today than it was 10 years ago? How? If it's not different, do you feel like your relationship is growing? And that was one that everyone has to answer for themselves. And maybe it's a pound a stake in the ground and see if you've made any progress, or put the mirror underneath your nose and make sure there's still breath in you. Like, is this, am I still here? Am I still moving? Am I going forward? And just speaking for myself, I think the last 10 years, my moving to Florida was a huge move forward in my understanding many, many mentors that have taken me under their wing and helped me understand, for someone who first off really didn't care to understand a whole heck of a lot because nothing was satisfying. And then when you find someone that kind of will take the extra time and kind of walk you through some things that maybe seem very trivial, but at the time seemed so huge, was a huge thing for me. So I would always encourage you, when we first moved to Florida, we had a great Bible study group. We're actually looking to start another one. It was a great every week kind of thing, keeps you in the conversation outside of church, and then you have church, and it just really keeps your mind moving all the time, and it was really, really good for us. So if you're struggling, find someone that you might know that you can talk to. Maybe that might be someone at church or, in a Bible study group, Sabbath school class, at WholeLife. Lots of ways to get involved. But our final thoughts are from the closing of Ken's message. He said, it's no accident there is no likeness of him, meaning God. He wants us to focus on our relationship with him, and relationships work best without boxes. Yes, they do. That was I love it when it's just like it works best without boxes. Yes, it does. And then you can just think of all the other relationships you have here that you understand a little bit better. Maybe not totally, like, men will never completely figure out women until maybe not even when we're in heaven. Or vice versa. It might just, that just might not happen until we get to heaven. Or maybe it's like we're going to understand God forever. So little humor there. So don't send angry text messages, please.
Or Randy Gray. That email address is randy@WholeLife.Church.
All right, next week we're still here. This will be number 3, sermon 4, but commandment 3. What are you saying, Ken? What are you saying next week?
Wow, it's going to be fun. We're going to be talking about taking God's name in vain. Is it just what you say, or could it be also what you do?
I grew up with it's what you say, but I think I'm seeing where you're swimming, and I'm in the wake. I think we'll find out next week. So that means you just got to come back.
Just surf it. Just surf it.
Just surf it. All right. Thanks, guys, so much, and appreciate so many people coming up last week at church retreat after. Like, everybody cleared out pretty quickly out of the A-frame, but you guys caught up with me all over campus the rest of the weekend, and just how much you enjoyed being there live and to see the inner workings and how much fun it was and how great Peter was. So that's a testament to staff for making sure we had someone who would, make us a little uncomfortable and make us think a little differently and get outside of our box that we're in sometimes, even as a denomination and even as diverse as we are at WholeLife. It's always good to get a different perspective. So I appreciated all the kind words and just wanted to say thank you for anyone that was out there that didn't get a chance to say so. We have a good time doing it, and we had a great time with Peter. So thanks for listening. Definitely share the podcast, and to anyone you think who could use a little uplifting in their life. And tune in next week to find out, what are you saying? Have a great week. See you.
See ya.